who is a colleague of mine at Johns Hopkins over the years, continues to work on a model that gets even closer and closer to the human condition, to mimic it more precisely what happens for humans with Marfan syndrome. And this has been very useful. The model has been vital, really, to try to develop therapies like losartan, and some people here with Marfan syndrome have been on losartan along with beta blocker. We think the pravastatin not only will provide an additional medication which may well prove to be very effective with the other drugs or even on its own, when we hope to get some clinical trials up and running in the future. But in addition to that, we'll be able to change the course of the disease or the syndrome for patients, and starting medications on very young patients might prevent the aortic aneurysms or the ballooning that Darren referred to, preventing that occurring in the first place. So all that's ahead of us, and I really see a very bright future for the research as we look to the next few years. The money obviously is a very large amount of money, and so what we have now been able to do over the last year particularly is we have the Children's Medical Research Foundation in Crumlin Hospital. They take the money, so you hand me the check, I'll pass it on to the Marfan Fund in the Children's Centre, and they administer the funds. So when anything has to be spent, if we have to buy equipment, if we have to pay for consumables for the lab, we put that to those who manage the fund in Crumlin, and so it's all very carefully watched and monitored. Then when we come up with a new idea, for example for the pravastatin that has led to such a stir over the last few months as it's been published, we then want to translate that into research. We put that to a peer review committee within Crumlin, and they look at the research that we do, and we just don't have to take my or Darren's or John's word that it's good research. We have peers or colleagues who critically look at it, and they may or may not like me, and so they'll be quite harsh in their criticism of the work to make sure that it's of the highest standard, and that's very important, because we rely on good healthy criticism, if you want, of the work to make sure it remains at a very high standard. It's very important for us that we share our results with people, but also to share our plans for the future. And so the peer review is very important. So we've established both that and the fund administration through Crumlin to the Children's Hospital, and that has put the if you want, the whole research project on a very firm foundation for the future. One area, for example, the publication and circulation that we produced in and of itself cost €2,500. So little things like that do add up, and everything, there's an expense with everything, I suppose, but just to give you an idea that the publication, the journal circulation sent us the costs of providing that information and sending out those publications worldwide. And for us, it's $2,500. We received that invoice from circulation that goes then to the research foundation, and they check, and if they're happy with that, yes, they'll go ahead and pay it. So that's the way the money is managed at the moment. So what of the future, and what are we going to use the $190,000 for? Well, it's one thing, and as many of you have all have experience of things like CT scanning to look at ultrasound or echocardiographic scans to look at the heart for Marfan patients. That's a very useful way to look at the size of the aorta as it increases, and that's been traditionally the way we've done it for patients. But where we need to move now is, we feel, is a biomarker for Marfan syndrome. In other words, a blood test that would allow us take certain patients with the condition and say we could predict in the future what will happen to them. So at the moment we put patients on medication keep an eye on them, and if when their aorta reaches a certain size or certain things happen, then we'll intervene. But we want to try and even circumvent that, and if you want to be a little bit more clever in our approach, and that is to identify markers in the blood that might allow us to predict that certain patients are likely to develop a certain problem and others may not, and therefore we don't have to put certain patients on certain medications, or we may not have to scan certain patients as often, which is very important to avoid radiation. And so our plan for the next 2 to 3 years will be to identify a biomarker. And this would be very important. We have them in certain types of cancers, for example. You've heard of people having blood tests to see if they're likely to develop a given cancer. And we've learned from that whole area of research, and we want to apply it now to Marfan syndrome and another particular condition which we'll come to in a little while. But the beauty of a biomarker would allow us then predict the future for certain patients and allow us to focus therapy in a certain direction for them. So a biomarker study, to give you an idea, this is where costs would go. We follow mice, again using the mouse model, over their lifespan, and that, for example, would cost us over the period of the study would cost about 15,000. The echo imaging of their heart is 2,000 euros, microanalysis of their aorta another 8,000. Screening of their blood samples with mass spectroscopy is extremely expensive, and for say 60 samples there you can see it's 23,000. But then we will start getting more focused, and when we begin to know what we're looking for, we would have it wouldn't be as costly. And to do this, it's been great to have Darren and John during their time as their training. In John's case, to be a general surgeon or vascular surgeon, and in Darren's case, a cardiac and vascular surgeon. But we would want to get an MD or a PhD from the lab to do this work specifically, and so that would cost us for 1 year about 28,000 euros. So you can see it quickly stacks up in terms of the price of research. But up until now, we've been able to cost contain, to know and to get the Research Foundation and the research itself on a firm footing. And from here, I think we can really now make a major impact looking for biomarkers, given the knowledge that we've accumulated over the last 3 and 4 years. Geraldine had mentioned, and I think it's very important, she had said the research is focused on Marfan's, other related cardiac conditions that we could make an impact on as well. And it was, I suppose, serendipity, but it certainly was, quite interesting that you should make that comment in an email, because I have noticed in the last few years I've operated on an equal number of patients with what we call bicuspid aortic valve disease. And this is a syndrome that's very similar to Marfan's, except it's much more common. And it's only being increasingly recognized over the last 20 years as we follow patients much more carefully from birth on. And these patients who have a bicuspid valve syndrome, it's not the same as Marfan's, although it is a genetic condition and you inherit it from your parents. But it can, because you've only 2 parts instead of 3, to your aortic valve. If you take a look here at a normal valve, it has 3 what we call leaflets. A large number of people, in fact, it's the commonest cardiac condition that is not normal to be born with, is to have a bicuspid aortic valve. So there are 2 parts instead of 3. Now, you can live your entire life and never know that you have that condition, and everybody's happy, and so be it. On the other hand, some newborn babies will have this condition, and they come to my attention, and I have to operate on them within the first week of life because of it. So it has a huge range, so it can something that will affect you at birth, all the way to having it and never even knowing about it until you pass away from some other condition. But by virtue of having a bicuspid valve, it means your aorta, this is just like it is for patients with Marfan syndrome, their aorta is prone to develop an aneurysm. And we think that there are very similar mechanisms in terms of how the